Hello everyone, Stephen here, and today we're going to be fulfilling a user request from several months ago, specifically a web bot to enter data from an Excel file into a website. And in the user example, they were requesting a financial website, so what I've picked here is a bunch of stock orders, and we're going to be entering them into a stock market simulator website. So the process we're going to go through is we're going to click login, we're going to enter our credentials, like so. And then once we've logged in, we'll be landed on this page. We want to go to trade, and then we're just going to fill out a stock order like so. And just set it to buy, quantity will do 1, market, there's all these other ones, order type. And we're just going to select market, duration, and then there's these two options, and then you click preview order, submit order, and then submit another order. So we're trying to do that one after the other without having to go through all these steps manually. So what we're going to do is we're going to be using a library called Selenium, and this is a web automation testing library. So it's not specifically designed for web bots, but it can be used. And just to preface this whole video, if you have a service or a website that opens up an API or they have an API created, you should most definitely use that API over this because they're expecting that traffic to come through the API, so you can authenticate yourself and all that jazz without having to try to avoid detection from the website. So there's two ways you could do this. You could do the web bot where you click it, but also APIs are probably better for this, but that's not what this video is about. So let's get into it. As I said before, we're using Selenium, and there's a lot of stuff that goes in to avoid detection, like rotating proxies, which I didn't do in this video because you'd usually have to pay for that. You can remove certain properties from your browsers, switch out user agents, and a user agent is just something that websites pick up from you. So it could be your browser type, so like Chrome, Firefox, Opera, whatever you use, and certain other properties like what screen size you're at, and so on and so forth. So I didn't go through all of it. I did a bit of research and tried to do as much as I can. So, and we'll see some of that when we set up the driver, which is in this one, I believe. So I'm using another library called random user agents. So has a predefined set of user agents, and each time we run the script, we pick a random one out of that, and to kind of avoid detection. So just to preface that, there's a lot of things that go into making a web bot undetectable, but we're not going to go too much into that in this video. So without further delay, let's kind of go through the code and see what we're doing here. So we have some regex here like the last videos. I'll explain what this is doing later on. And then we're creating a config file from right here. And this is where we're going to store all the HTML locations of our boxes we saw just a second ago. So if you right click and click inspect on a box, you might have to do it several times here to actually get the correct one. But you can see within here, and if I click around a bit, you'll see it highlight differently. But if we click here, we can see this is the div, or we call it a div, and it has a class called vselect__slot. So this is an identifier for this, and we use this throughout the video because if you click inspect on these other ones right here, and I can't do it unless I enter a stock, you click inspect again, you'll see that it's common between all of them. And you can use several methods to do this. Typically, there's an order that you should go for, which is using IDs. And I don't know if I showed this right here. You might notice in the options of this drop down for symbols, you can see a thing here that says ID equals list item 509-0. Now, in a perfect world, this is what we would want to use. But website administrators and creators know that people are going to be creating web bots, so they try to make it hard for you to index directly. So what actually happens, and I noticed this while creating the script, is every time you rerun the script, these unique identifiers, in quotation marks here, are actually randomized. So one run of it would be this thing, and then the next run it could be something completely different. So ideally you would want to go for stuff like IDs, but we can't in this case, so we're going to go for the next best thing, which are class names. And as I mentioned before, if you click right here, you try to find something common to all of them, and luckily for us, the common thing is vselect__slot. And so that's what we're going to be using to query these dropdowns and actually select it within the Python script. So you will need to do a bit of research on your website and playing around. This isn't something you can kind of code in one sitting. You kind of have to test around to make sure you're getting the best option that is available to you. So that's what that is. So this config file is going to host all the paths towards it. And one of the reasons it took me so long to make this video is originally I had used something called an XPath, and I'll just briefly show that to you. You can go inspect. And then once you're here, you can do something copy, and then copy XPath. And then we can open a text editor just to look at this. And you'll notice it gives you this ridiculously long path. So what I was noticing is, at first, I was using all these XPaths to query these elements. But what I found is if I ran this script like a day, a week later, it would fail and say that these items weren't recognizable. So what I kind of suspected is the website was shifting a bit in terms of their elements. So you want to, in the best case, try to find something generic that you can kind of manipulate to work for you. And I'll kind of explain how I tackled this website. So the first thing, as I mentioned, was I tried XPaths, and that works for some things, as you can notice right here, like the login link, the username, the password, and the login button. They all stay pretty static, so you're fine to do that. But for the rest of the things, you'll kind of have to switch it up. So we'll go into that later. And we set up the driver. We saw that before. That's where we maximized our screen, randomized our user agent. So that's what we're doing. Then we're actually going to get the site we're working on. So that's what you see here. And then once we do that, we're going to load cookies. If you're loading this from a previous session, it's good to have cookies because websites, the way they kind of tell you're a human or trusted is they collect cookies on you. So if you have a set of cookies going into this prior, it'll be more trustworthy is the idea. So next we're going to log in, and so this is my own custom function. If I scroll all the way down here, all it's doing is clicking that login. So I'll try pulling up the browser here and we'll actually log out again. Yep, okay, so let's make this 2 screens. We'll try to make this 2 screens. Okay, so what this script is doing, and we'll try to get rid of this, is first it's going to click in the login links. That's this button right here. So that line of code right there is clicking the button. And then you'll notice here that we have these methods called halt steps. And what these are is another custom method I did, which halts the script or sleeps the script every time it's called, and it will sleep it from 1 to 3 seconds. It'll randomize that. And the reason you do that is because websites will actually track clicks and what you're doing interacting with the web page. And if you do it too quickly, it'll kind of recognize you're a bot and start maybe limiting your requests, make you solve CAPTCHAs and stuff like that to continue. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to randomize it and kind of make it look like an actual human is clicking that. So that's what the halt steps are doing. They're just adding a random sleep between 1 and 3. Now, the reason I'm not hard coding is because that can be picked up as a pattern also. If it notices you're entering something and then sleeping for 1 second and then instantly going to the next thing, that can develop patterns. So what we're trying to do is randomize it, which is very important here. So that's what we're doing when we hit halt steps. And then the next thing we're going to do is actually enter our username and password. Now, I explored several options, and the best one that I found for me was using something called a keyring. And this keyring thing is a built-in Windows password manager. So it's already on your Windows operating system, assuming you're on Windows. And what it does is it uses this Python library keyring to interact with that. So you can store your password for the site there and access it very easily in the Python script without exposing it within a text file or something like that. So in the API, the way you do it, and this is the documentation, I'll link this, is to set a password. What you do is you import keyring, you do keyring.setPassword, and you give it a unique identifier. So in this case, it'll be system. And then you give it a kind of like sub-unique name called username. And then you put in the actual value for it. So like say if this is your username, or I guess this would be your password, it's a bit confusing. So for the Investopedia site, what we've done is we called it Investopedia, and then we gave it a user login, unique identifier under Investopedia, and then we actually set the value for that, which I'm not going to show here, but that this is what your actual value is. So this could be your password, your username, whatever. And so once you do that, you can then call this function keyring.getPassword, and you pass in your unique identifier. So that's Investopedia, and I'm looking for the user login, and that would be the password. So it'll enter it and it won't expose it in plain text. So that's the great thing about keyring. Now there's other options, but this is the one I chose to do. So if you're trying to run this, you'll need to do this setup here. Anyways, so that's what these two lines do. It enters the username and password into these fields right here, and the last line of code clicks the login button. So then that signs you in. That's all it does. Next, what we're trying to do here is click on the trade button. So if I log in again, let's see if that works. There. So that's all that login thing is doing, is just logging in. Next, what it's going to do is these lines of code are going to actually click the trade button, and you might notice this method here. All it's doing is every time we go through a page, it's waiting for a certain element to load. So in this case, it would be this element. So once we click the login button from here, it's going to wait to see within a certain time frame if this button loads here. So that's all that's doing. And then this is actually going to click it. And again, we're halting and waiting to kind of make sure we don't appear as a robot. Next, we're going to read in the Excel file as a pandas data frame like last time. And we're just going to pass it in with these default values. Next, we're going to iterate over that Excel file. And each iteration, we're going to enter something into this page here. So that's what the whole for loop you see right here is doing that. So the first thing we're going to do is, and I'll make this screen a bit bigger and I'll try to flip back and forth and see how that works. So the first thing we're going to do is actually enter the stock into the search bar. So the search bar being, and let me see if we can actually do this. Make this a bit bigger. There we go. So this line is going to actually enter it into here. So these two lines. And then what we're actually going to do with these lines right here is when you see this, you'll actually see a bunch of options here. So the way we kind of know we're getting the right one is we inspect here and we try to find where it highlights all the elements in this box. So this would be this one right here, I believe. And you'll notice, and if I scroll down a bit here and minimize maybe some of these, that when I hover over one of these, it kind of corresponds, or it does correspond to one of the elements over here. So what we need to do basically is find out which one contains Tesla. So we're going to grab this thing right here, which encompasses all of them, and we're going to get the inner HTML, which is represented by these things right here. And we're going to collect the ID numbers you see right here. So if you remembered, we had a bunch of regex up here, which is ID equals blah. Basically what it's going to do is it's going to look for ID equals and essentially just collect all the text past it. So we're going to grab all this text right here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to look up the inner HTML of this by that item label right here and expand it. Sorry, that. And we'll get this inner HTML here. And then we're going to run yet another regex function here to look for this value, Tesla. So if we find that value within there, then we're going to grab it. So the way that looks like, and sorry if I go back up here, we're first calling stock input get IDs. So that's what that's doing. Let's scroll down to get IDs. We're setting inner HTML to an empty string. And if we're passing in the actual element, like it's precompiled, then we'll just go down to this block right here. Otherwise, if we're trying to actually locate it, we'll go into the if statement here. And so we're waiting for it to load, and then elements by class name config.get, and then we're basically just looking for, just to back up here before I get ahead of myself, is this line right here specifies the actual path of the class name. If we go back, it's config.get path heading path item. And I know it would be this one right here. So we're indexing this right here. Now, something else to note here before we continue, and I do apologize if this is really confusing, is when you select the class right here, when you go to put it into your file, you'll notice that there's a bunch of spaces right here. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't work with the spaces. It turns out you need to delete all the spaces and replace it with a dot, like so. That's if you're doing it by class name, which I'm doing right here. So you would need to turn it into this and set it. And then as you can see, if you highlight it, it's exactly the same as what we pulled. So if you're doing it by class name, make sure that if there's multiple classes that you put the dots in between in your configuration file when you're indexing it. So that's what that does. And so we're passing that in right there. And something I may have mentioned is they do share a common class, which is this in all the dropdowns. So make the screen bigger just to kind of emphasize this, is if you inspect, and you might have to do this a couple times. Oh, my bad. I have to actually inspect right here. And we're trying to look for the section that gives it the whole highlight of the box. It's the exact, if you notice here, the class is exactly the same as the stock symbol one. So what we actually do in this case is we run a command from the library called driver.findElements. So that's going to find all elements of this class name and store it in a list. So what that looks like, and I'll try to explain it in terms of this. This is the Investopedia drop-down page, and this is our hypothetical HTML here on the right. So we have the drop-down for this one, and it has a class name of test right here. And then we see it has the same drop-down for here. And then for number 3, it's over here, and it has the same class, same with 4, and whatever. So what we're trying to do when we run this command is grab all of these elements with the same class name and store it in a single array. And luckily for us, the website orders that array in from 0 to 3, and it goes from left, right, bottom down. So we have a fairly easy way to index it. So if you can imagine this, imagine it as an array. And so when we first enter into the array and we collected all these elements, we'll be indexing at the 0th element, which is the first element. And then when we go to enter our action, we'll be indexing the second element, which is 1 in the array, and so on and so forth for these. So if I go back to the code, what we're actually doing in here is we're specifying the inner HTML to be the length of the elements. So in this case, it would be 4. And then depending on which step we're on, because all these boxes need to load once you click them. So the first time we click into symbol, it'll only find the element for this one right here. The second time when we do find elements, it'll find this one and this one. So the length will increase as we go through the steps of the program. So whatever the length is, we're going to take the length of elements, -1 because Python is a zero-dex library, and that will be our current step. We're trying to get the inner HTML for those drop-downs are. I hope that made sense. If not, I'll try maybe doing a follow-up video to explain it better, but that's how I did it right here. So I'm just going to quickly go through the rest because I see we've gone to 18 minutes. So that's what it basically does for the rest of them, is you get a set of IDs, you pass it in, and you try to go through each steps and halt at each step. And then finally, what you do is you dump your cookies back into your cookies file right here. That's so if you run it again, you have some sort of history on it. So that's all it does. And then finally, you quit the driver and you're done. So this is the part of the video where we go over what it actually does. So I'll do that. Let's click run and go through it. So it loads the website, and as you can see, I'm not clicking anything because you can see the mouse right there. And those pauses are our sleep timers in the script. I'm just gonna remove this. So we're gonna go enter our first doc, which is Apple, and then it's gonna select the top one. It's gonna select buy, quantity 1, market, day only, and it's gonna preview the order. Again, these are the sleeps in between, I believe. There we go. It's going to the next one. Something you might be able to do is reduce the sleeps a little bit. Maybe 1 to 2 seconds would work, but I just did 3 to give it a bit more randomization, so it is a bit slower. Next, we're going to enter the Tesla one and preview the order. Again, you can't see my mouse, but it's over here, and I'm not clicking anything. Next is NVIDIA stock. And again, I just picked these stocks at random for the video. I don't have any affiliation with them. It's just they're tech stocks and they're ones I know about. And yeah, that's it. And there you go. It finally quit, and it did all these stocks. If we look, the last one was an Intel stock, and yeah. So this is a really interesting library, and there's a lot of jobs for this type of library. It's actually used in a lot of automation testing, and if you ever encounter a job like that, it'll probably be in Java, but the concepts are the same in Python. So that's it for this video. I hope I explained it somewhat well. If not, I can try to do a follow-up video. If you have another suggestion, please leave it in the comments. And that's all.